Hello, everyone. Thank you for watching today's webinar, ABCs in Action, Advancing Student Success Through Advocacy, a framework for school counselors and administrators to strengthen SEL implementation. My name is Patricia Gagnon, and I am the Chief Experience Officer and a co-founder of IntelliSpark. We are so fortunate to have as our featured guests the 2018 National School Counselor of the Year, Kirsten Perry, and DePaul University Professor of Counseling, Dr. Melissa Ockerman. This webinar brings you a wonderful introduction to their new book, The ABCs of Social Emotional Learning for School Counselors and Administrators. It is full of practical and thoughtful information to boost well-being and academic success for students through effective SEL. IntelliSpark is bringing you this webinar today because the essence of this work, connecting a student's well-being to their academic and long-term success in life, is core to who we are. Over 300 schools use our IntelliSpark technology platform to ensure that each student in their school is known and supported by a well-informed and well-connected staff. You can find out more about us at intellispark.com. At the end of this webinar, I will be sharing how you can connect with us and, of course, how to obtain a copy of Kirsten and Melissa's new book. Now, I'd like to hand you over to our featured guests, Kirsten and Melissa. Over to you.
Hey. All right. So welcome, everyone. We are so delighted to be here with you this evening. We want to send out a special thank you to IntelliSpark for facilitating the webinar, and also to Character Strong and Zello for co-sponsoring this webinar. And we welcome all of you, school counselors, administrators, MTSS coordinators. Thank you so much for being here. We're just delighted. And it really is our sincere intention that you walk away from this webinar feeling like you have some new tools in your toolbox to strengthen social emotional learning, connection, and belonging.
Hello, everyone. This is Kirsten Perry. Before we get into our webinar today and go into the contents of our book, we wanted to share a little bit about how this book came to be. Again, I'm Kirsten Perry. I served in Chicago Public Schools for around 11 years. The last role that I had when I was in the district was serving as a social and emotional learning specialist, where I coached 27 schools. Simultaneous to that, at that time, I was also teaching a graduate level course along with Dr. Melissa Ockerman. And this was at the time when the COVID-19 pandemic originally hit. So it was a very challenging time. So in many ways, Melissa and I had that experience together, and we had a lot of opportunity to have dialogue about what we were seeing in schools. So like I said, at the time, I was serving 27 schools. And so I got to see a lot of the different ways that schools were impacted, and also the ways that many schools were able to navigate those challenging times in a very positive way. And what I saw is that a lot of the schools that did well during that time were implementing social emotional learning practices well. So because of that, that led Melissa and I to have a lot of dialogue about what really works in schools and what is most effective to best serve our students. At the same time, I was also serving as the president of the Illinois Counseling Association, and I put together a steering committee called the ISCA Race and Equity Committee, where we talked about social justice work, equity, and culturally responsive practices during that time. And Melissa also served on that committee as well. So in addition to teaching college level courses, supporting 27 schools, we were also discussing the work at large throughout the state of Illinois and what we saw as the best practices for equity and social justice. You could imagine, with having 3 jobs during that time, I started to experience a high level of burnout. There was No denying it. I had a lot of the signs and symptoms, and it wasn't just me. I also witnessed it happening to many other educators in every level. I saw it happening to district personnel. I saw it happening to principals, school counselors, and every level of the practice in schools during that time. So it also led me to wonder, what are the best practices that we could put in place to prevent burnout? Um, During that time, I was experiencing, as I said, a lot of burnout. So I made the decision to step away from the work to recharge my battery. And I made the decision to take a big leap of faith and move to the other side of the world. And so I moved to Singapore. I currently live here now. It's year number 4 for me. It's given me a lot of opportunity to reflect on my work and my practices. And so the picture that you see here with the heart is me. And this is a moment in time when I was visiting the beautiful island of Bali in Indonesia. And I will let Melissa take it from here to share more about our experience and how this book came to be.
Yeah, thank you so much, Kirsten. So as Kirsten mentioned, our paths have intersected in lots of meaningful ways for over a decade. We can't believe it's a decade. Clearly, our students get older, we get younger. I mean, it's crazy. But my own journey started actually when I was very young. I had both of my parents are art teachers in a public school district. And very early, I started to see disparities in their district and in our small middle class schools. And but they kept at it and they kept showing up and they kept caring. And so my parents instilled in me this curiosity about what's going on here with these disparities, but also they were a wonderful example of how one or two people can really make a difference. I was really fortunate to do my graduate level work at Ohio State. They had a large multi-million dollar grant at the time that was designed to transform the way school counselors are trained. And the idea was we knew that school counselors were in a really pivotal position to help close opportunity, access, and achievement gaps in schools. But if we wanted that to happen, we had to train our school counselors differently. So my experiences as a director of 2 Columbus Public Schools counseling centers really taught me a lot. These were schools that had large gang affiliations, high mobility, high poverty rates. But my training taught me the importance of looking at systems. And though some of the systems were actually working against student needs. And real change happens when these systems are challenged. And also when we are looking for the strengths of our students and their families, their resilience, their resourcefulness, creativity, and talents. And so that is how I arrived to DePaul University in Chicago. They were looking for someone to transform their school counseling program. A few years later, insert a student named Kirsten Perry. And as you now know, we worked together in many, many different settings. So when she called me to ask if I would write her a letter of recommendation for a position in Singapore, I said, absolutely. And when you get it, my mom and I will come visit you. Well, she got the job. And there we are. There we are in Singapore. From there, we all took a puddle jumper over to Bali. And it was there when we really started discussing what ultimately would become the blueprint for this book. So the moral of the story is go to Bali and magical things happen.
It really truly is a magical place. Okay, so now I'm going to switch over to just kind of letting you know and understand about what to expect from today's webinar, and kind of getting more understanding about our book. So first, we're going to explain the purpose of the ABCs, what the acronym stands for, and how it helps to strengthen school-wide social emotional learning practices in schools. So we're not just focusing on school counselor practice, but also looking at school-wide practice and what that looks like. Secondly, we're going to be focusing on practical strategies to align school counseling roles within broader SEL frameworks. And so that's one thing I've seen as a counselor and also someone working in leadership, supporting schools, is that a lot of times the school counselor's role within social emotional learning frameworks is not clearly defined. So we hope to make sure that's clear for anyone that's watching how school counselors specifically support these larger frameworks. And then finally, we want to share how this school can be used as an advocacy tool for school counselors to really help others understand their role in those frameworks, and also to be used as a collaborative tool to support students. So like I said, this book is not just for school counselors, it's also for administrators, and it's also for social emotional learning teams supporting students in schools.
Right. So we wanted to start with our why. And as many of you know, the reality on the ground, unfortunately, became this self-defeating continuous cycle where we saw lots of high need from students and depleted resources, which leads naturally to high rates of burnout. Many of you will remember 2021, or maybe that's all a blur. But at that time, our US Surgeon General sounded the alarm that students were really suffering. We saw lots of increases in loneliness and grief, depression, self-injury, suicidal ideation. And we know that school-based services are often the only source of mental health services that a large majority of children and adolescents will ever be exposed to. So in our quest, however, to prove that school counselors are really essential, which we are, we ended up kind of doing ourselves a little bit of a disservice by claiming sole responsibility for academic, social, emotional, and college and career development. And at the same time, there was this when we saw the SEL needs of our students rising, there came a new political reality, which began to sort of conflate SEL into a woke agenda. And since school counselors were typically the ones responsible for SEL, we too became a target of political pushback.
One thing that I've also noted, supporting schools is that um, to keep social emotional learning practices sustainable, to prevent counselor burnout, and face the real true realities that students are struggling with, is that this work cannot happen in silos. It cannot be school counselors shouldering the heavy lift of this weight alone. But it really truly needs to be entire schools, everyone in the school building, including custodians, teachers, security guards, principals, administrators. Really, everyone needs to be all hands on deck doing this work. And that's definitely a point that we really try to emphasize in our book. Okay, so this is what Melissa and I have come up with to help support building sustainable practices in schools. So, a lot of the big discussion right now is educator burnout. We're seeing it throughout the country and throughout the world, just with a lot of heavy lifting, and a lot of the reason comes back to mental health and social emotional needs of students. And so, how are we really working to support students and also educators working in school buildings? And so we came up with an acronym, so ABC. And so I'm just going to go over what each letter of the acronym stands for. So A is for adaptive. So one thing I've seen with school counseling programs is that we often build our programs at the start of the year based on the previous school year's data. And it's a proactive approach, which is absolutely necessary. And we need to always be thinking about how we're doing our work intentionally. But we know working in schools that's not always the reality. A lot of times things happen, like the COVID-19 pandemic, for example. Things happen that create unexpected change. Sometimes there's a lot of movement in schools. I've worked in schools where there's lots of student movement. And so we need to be prepared for how are we meeting the needs of students in real time. And so with that said, we have come up with an adaptive approach. So while we have those proactive strategies, we're also thinking about how can we meet the needs of students and communities in real time. Also, I want to emphasize too that that's not just true of school counseling programs. A lot of schools have larger continuous improvement plans that are also done and formed in that same way. So we're also looking at intentional programming at the start of the year, not just in our school counseling programs, but even in school buildings at large. So we really want to also think about how to just make school practices generally adaptive. The B is for balanced. And so that really is pointing to that this work should not be siloed. We should also always be thinking about how we're doing this work and how all the members of the school community are participating. Oftentimes, I find that social emotional learning practices are seen as this separate programming. But one thing that we really want to emphasize is that it's not. It's entirely integrated in every single thing that we do. So that's even saying hello to students in the morning. It's completely a part of our teaching practices in classrooms when we're talking about classroom management. We're talking about the way in which we teach students, how we form relationships with students in classrooms, and then also how we're supporting them through multi-tiered systems of support. But how are we balancing this work so not one or a few individuals are shouldering this weight, but how everyone is involved, which leads to C, which is collaborative. I find as an educator that one of the best ways to get buy-in for the work of social emotional learning is to do it collaboratively, so we could all put our heads together and think about what works best for our schools and communities. And also in that collaboration, I find that it's incredibly important to not just work together as educators collaborating and finding solutions, but to also be looking to students and parents and other community members about how to do this work well. I've always found that that leads to the best practice and that ensures that we're being culturally responsive.
So we knew that we wanted this text to not just lay out the problems, and we spend a lot of time sometimes really admiring the problem, but we needed to present some equitable solutions. And actually, Kirsten will talk about that in our next slide. But we really also wanted to highlight voices from the field, those who are actually doing this work and they're doing it successfully. Um, Also within the chapter, we thought it was really important to have resources and tools, including ready to use, downloadable implementation templates to help school counselors and administrators immediately. And we'll share a few of those with you in this presentation. We also wanted to provide strategies for growth and development, really helping to foster a community of professional learners and to have some opportunities to do that work together. And because we thought all of those things worked really well together, that was the structure of how we thought about and planned each of our chapters.
Thank you, Melissa. So like Melissa said, we did want to kind of highlight the equity and culturally responsive practices that we have integrated throughout the book and also kind of further explain our rationale behind that. So Melissa and I over the past few years have done a lot of deep looking into social emotional learning practices. And as we were doing deep looking into these practices, we realized that there is just absolutely no separation of social emotional learning from culturally responsive practices. Our identities are completely interwoven into the way that we think about ourselves, our feelings, our social interactions, and also our understanding of one another. So we believe that to do this work well, this needs to absolutely be integrated in every single thing that we do. So with that point being made, throughout the book and each and every chapter, you'll see that culturally responsive practices and equity are entirely interwoven throughout. They're not separate. And so, like I said, we believe that this work should be integrated into everything that we do.
Yeah. And so we thought that to kind of bring this to life a little bit, we could present a case study using one of our ready-to-use templates. In this case, it's the MTSS Tier 1 problem-solving protocol. And we thought we could talk about a hallway conflict because everybody who's worked in a school knows that that can often be a common occurrence. So in this one, we administrators and school counselors started to notice an uptick of conflicts happening in the hallways during passing periods. And the symptoms, and we use that word intentionally, were verbal teasing, minor scuffles, seemingly lack of any consistent interventions and therefore consequences. And when asked, students said, well, they thought the hallways were too crowded and that people were disrespecting their personal space.
Okay, so I've worked as a school counselor in schools for many years, and I've actually seen it happen sometimes when bullying's happening in the hallways, that sometimes that can actually fall onto many times the dean and also sometimes the school counselor as the people who have to solve this problem. But one thing that we really want to emphasize throughout the book is how to use these practices using the ABC approach. So before we go into kind of walking through a problem-solving model, we just wanted to explain that throughout the book, you're going to see a lot of practices that are commonly used in schools. And what we do in the book is we really break down how to use them with an ABC lens, with the goal of making sure that it's clear what the counselor's role is, making it clear how schools should be working together, making sure it's clear that this work should be completely integrated throughout programming. So with that said, we do highlight in our book different approaches. So the distributed leadership model, for example, for administrators, we do a deep look at the Castle framework. We look at frameworks like the American School Counseling Association framework. We also look at the International School Counseling Association framework and other frameworks such as multi-tiered systems of support. In this example, we're looking at the problem-solving model. And so this is just one of the commonly used practices used in schools, but we really emphasize, again, how to use this with an ABC approach, making sure that it's clear. This protocol comes from Chapter 5, so I do want to give credit to the authors of Chapter 5, which are Emily Goodman-Scott, Oliver Camacho, and Elisa Lewis. So here we go. So step one in the problem solving model is to really look at data, look at it closely. So here we have data looking at office discipline referrals. We're looking at minor incident logs. And we do say that using a practice like this with a school-based team, we should look more deeply at it. What are some other additional information that is needed to help make it clear what's happening here in this particular space? So we could look at data and we can filter it by race and ethnicity, gender to notice equity gaps, to really understand what's happening in the hallway. We could also do focus groups to get student perspectives on what's happening and really do things like reviewing hallway supervision. I do want to, because I know that Melissa really gave a shout out to IntelliSpark, Character Strong, and Zello for supporting this webinar today. But I also want to give a shout out in reverse back to them because I find, and I've seen this in my career, a lot of schools doing this work by hand using Excel sheets and Google spreadsheets, and there's a lot of room for human error when you use those kinds of hand tools. And it really is amazing that there's so many platforms out there that we could use now that really, prevent that human error that could be made when we're doing this kind of data collection in rote form. So I do really strongly recommend that schools get these kinds of platforms because they make the work so much more efficient and it's a lot less time cumbersome.
Yes, exactly. And again, that also everybody can see the same data at the same time. Like this is just a pretty amazing, and let's use those tools to become as efficient as possible. So step one was defining the problem, and step two here is looking at the root cause. And rather than treating those symptoms, we need to figure out what's really going on. And this work has to be about needing to step away from this idea that students need to be fixed and concentrate on the systems that are perpetuating the problem. So in this case, as you know, ODRs are office discipline referrals, and minor verbal and physical altercations in the hallway were increasing. And we're going to use a template from chapter 5. And It's called the five whys. So we continue to ask the question why, and we'll move through this with you here. So the MTSS team would ask, why is this happening? Why are ODRs increasing in the hallways? Well, because students are engaging in more conflicts in the hallways, including physical pushing and verbal disagreements. And then, okay, well, why are students engaging in more conflict in the hallways? Well, because transitions are chaotic and students are not consistently following the behavior expectations in the hallway. Okay, well, why are students not consistently following the hallway behavior expectations? Because students are unclear about what appropriate hallway behavior looks like in transitions. All right, here we are at number 4. Why? Why are students unclear about the appropriate hallway behavior? Because hallway expectations have not been explicitly taught, modeled, or practiced. And our 5th, okay, so why have the hallway expectations not been explicitly taught or reinforced? Because staff assumed that students already knew the expectations, and there is no real shared school-wide plan for reteaching or reinforcing hallway behavior.
So once we kind of come up with a hypothesis for why this behavior is occurring and the problem, for the problem, to address the problem of practice, we then shift to thinking about an implementation plan, an intervention plan. So one thing that we really emphasize in the book throughout is a team approach. So you could see here that now that we've determined that the problem behavior is happening in the hallway because there's not a clear understanding of what the expectations are, we can come up with a plan of how to address it. So here you could see in the first column, the intervention, the second column, who is responsible, and we highlight that column because that is part of our acronym, the B for balance. So how are we sharing this work? The next column is for progress monitoring, which really leads to that adaptive piece. So um, how are we constantly monitoring and updating our programs as needed to meet the real-time needs of students? And then also just looking at timing so that people know when, where, and how this work should be done. So you could see in this example, we have advisory teachers reteaching hallway expectations using visuals. We have administrators working to make sure that the supervision expectations are clear for other faculty members. You could see that we have the MTSS team, coming up with protocols to make sure there's consistent staff response. And then you can see the school counselor's role here is to facilitate those focus groups of students to make sure that we're understanding their perspective. What's great about this is that not only does it make this counselor's role transparent for themselves, but it also lets everyone in the school know what they're doing. Because oftentimes I've seen as a school counselor myself that people are always asking, what are you doing? And people don't know what we're doing in our offices. And what's great about having a transparent protocol like this is that everyone knows what you're doing and what your role is in this work.
Oh, huge. So here comes the fun part. We get to evaluate whether or not these interventions are working. And I know sometimes there's some resistance to data. It's like a 4-letter word. And while it is, it really can be your best friend if you are using it in a way that facilitates learning and growth. And that's what we're trying to do. So how do we know that it's working? Well, the ODRs are down by 18%. So school counselors, we used to call that outcome data. Starting in August with the 5th edition of the ISCA model, we now call it achievement data, but potato, same thing. And we're seeing fewer incidents in these really high conflict areas. And students do think that it feels less crowded because actually staff are helping to regulate passing periods in the hallway. And because several key players, as Kirsten just went through, are responsible for it, they can also begin to see the fruits of their labor. And then after we look through and see the progress that we've made, we know that really deep learning happens when you reflect. So we ensure that part is also something that all team members engage in. And we realize that to maintain these positive results, we have to continue to work with staff for fidelity of implementation, making sure that we have refreshers throughout the year, continue to keep in checking with our students. We really like this example because it really highlights the ABCs. We had to adapt to an unforeseen uptick in ODRs. We needed to balance this work with others to be successful. And through collaboration, we were able to create an equitable solution that worked.
Okay, so that is just an example of one of the templates that we have available in our book. And like we said, we wanted to make this work as practical as possible for schools, especially building programs from the ground up. We wanted to make it practical. We wanted to make it user-friendly. We wanted to make sure that it was very clear how to use these practices and protocols in schools. I did want to emphasize here too that our book also includes a lot of professional learning exercises. So not only do we have these templates and describe how to use them, we also have professional learning that goes along with them so that schools can easily use these in schools and also provide staff with the training that they need. Um, we're not going to go through the whole book here, but we do want to point out for anyone who does have the book that in chapter 9, we do have a reference table there that covers at a high level all of the topics that we discuss in the book, as well as all the resources, templates, and professional learning that we have. Like I said, we really look closely at all of the main leading practices within schools that we've seen are effective, that are useful, and we did a deep look at them of how to use them in a practical way to prevent burnout.
Yeah. So another template we're going to sort of spotlight here. We're giving credit to our authors of Chapter 6, so Peg Donahue, Rebecca Pianta, and Jennifer Betters-Bubon. It's always important to center student voice. And so that by doing that, we can co-create a collaborative approach that is culturally responsive. We need input and buy-in from our students if the interventions are going to be successful. There is an excellent book if you haven't heard of it. It's called Street Data. I really recommend it. It really helps walk through different ways of collecting qualitative data and why that is best practice.
I would like to say that too. That is a tool. I'm currently a school counselor, and that is a tool I actually do use in my practice. So thank you to the authors of that chapter for developing that tool. And I've also had many others come reach out to me saying how much they found that tool to be helpful. I think a lot of times we don't always ask students about what works best for them, and they sometimes are the ones that really truly hold the answer. So I do really highly recommend using that tool. Like I said, I use it in my own practice as well. Another template that we wanted to highlight as an example from our book is this administrative conference check-in tool. So as school counselors in our programs, we often at the start of the year have an administrative conference with our principal. We review our programs. We look at all of the resources that we need. We look at the professional development we need and just our program generally. And then we sign off an agreement at the start of the year. One thing I've seen in my own practice, and I'm sure many educators would agree with me, is that often changes and a lot of things can happen. And I've seen things happen, like, for example, the year when the FAFSA date moved. I know that there's a lot of things happening politically in the country that impact schools. Suddenly, you might have a lot of change in your student body, and that changes the data metrics a lot. And sometimes that could lead to needing other things, like I need some additional professional development. I need to move the time that I was planning to do this intervention to a different time of the year. I actually maybe need to spend more time on this intervention that I thought. And one thing that I've seen is that when we don't adjust our programs, that it could lead to additional burnout as well if we keep adding more and more and more and more. And that's one thing about school counselors, is that we have so many skills and abilities that we often can become a dumping ground of a large amount of tasks and responsibilities. So this template was created to be able to check back in with administrators about your program. So how is it going? Is it, what's going well? What needs improvement? What maybe needs to be modified a little bit? Is there some other professional development training that you need to support our students given this new need that happened in the school building? Is there any other resources that you need? Is there something that can maybe be taken off your plate because priorities have shifted? And so this tool was created for exactly that, to check in with administrators. And we recommend using it regularly, at least quarterly, throughout the school year, just to make sure that we're really truly not only meeting the needs of communities in real time, but also meeting our own needs. Oh, and I wanted to also give credit to Alexandra Novakovic, Rebecca Michaels, and Tim Franklin for that resource. Oh, sorry. Um, so, uh, so just like we said at the start, one of our main ambitions for this book was to design it in a way that it could also be used as an advocacy tool. So, like I said, I'm a former school counselor, and I was also serving as a social emotional learning specialist supporting whole schools. And a lot of times I've seen that the school counselor's role can become very confusing, and even in the domain of social emotional learning in particular, because we have specialized training and supporting social emotional learning, people often look to us to be leaders, and sometimes people look to us to be the person that's managing everything for social and emotional learning. But we all know that that's not realistic, that's not practical, and that's actually not best practice. And so one of our main objectives, as we've been stating throughout this webinar, is really to make sure that the counselor's role within comprehensive social emotional learning frameworks outside of the American School Counseling Association model or outside of the International School Counseling Association model are clear. And also, as we've stated, we really wanted to make sure that we created this book to be usable. And so there's so many different ways that this book can be used. I've heard of people already using this book as part of book studies for their teams. So if you have an SEL team at school or an MTSS team at school that's focusing on social emotional learning, this book is really great as a book study to really walk through it, look at best practices, really kind of thinking about how to do this work effectively. This book can also be used for just school professional learning. So some of the chapters can be even used in isolation, whether that's part of a school counseling program or an administrator program, or even for school faculty within schools. And then also, because the book was written specifically with school counselors and administrators in mind, it could even be a tool for school counselors and administrators to look at closely together to make sure that they're really looking at social emotional learning practices through the lens of how to do it well in schools comprehensively. Now I'll hand it back to you, Melissa.
All right, gotcha. So as we've stated several times today, if we want to make a real difference, we need to go to the source. Dr. Pat Martin said in the early 2000s, what we tend to do is try to run and try to catch kids downstream. Like if there's a waterfall, we're down there at the bottom trying to catch them. And instead, if we really, really want to make a real difference, we need to go to the top of the waterfall and figuring out what they're slipping on. And the way we do that is through systems, right? We need to be constantly thinking about how can we strengthen systems to better serve all. And to do that, we kind of have to move away from this random acts of guidance, right? To be much more intentional in our practice. And that means we have shared responsibility by all staff, as we've discussed, and administrators. So that can increase the success of SEL interventions, but also, again, prevent that burnout that we know is so prevalent right now with educators. As we say in our book, we cannot keep expecting school counselors to be superheroes. But really, make no mistake about it. We are really super at what we do, which leads me well right into this week. Happy National School Counseling and International School Counseling Week. This year, the theme is a fitting one, amplifying success and amplifying the success of students, which is really what the ABCs is all about.
All right, everyone. I just want to say that Melissa and I are not used to doing sessions where we're just doing all the talking. We like to have interactive sessions. So we really, really, really hope that you have enjoyed this time with us, that you have a good little taste of what you can find in our book. If anyone has interest in purchasing the book, here is our QR code, and you'll see we have a little discount code for you as well. So save 20% by using our Save 20 code. We also wanted to really highlight all of the contributors to the book. So this is an edited book. So Melissa and I are not the only authors of this book. There's 2 to 3 authors on each chapter. We selected people to contribute to our book who we see as experts, not only in higher education, but also those working in school buildings. These are people that we know personally from our work, who have done this work and have done it well. And so we wanted to make sure that we leveraged people who we know how to do the work. And so with that said, I do want to give a shout out to all of our amazing contributors. And I want to say too that Melissa and I aimed high. We said we want the best, and
Yeah.
we asked for the best, and we were so very fortunate to get the best. So
Yes,
with
it
that,
was like, oh, sorry, because
yeah,
it was like the dream team. We're
it
like,
was like the
okay,
dream. Yeah.
like, like you said, let's aim high. And it was so amazing that everyone said yes. We're still incredibly
Yeah,
thankful
every
for that.
person we asked said yes.
Yeah.
So with that said, we have the amazing Anita Young, Jasmine Thurman,
Mhm.
Niloufar Rizai, Mandy Savitz Romer, Leonis Wright, Darnell Fine, Alicia Oglesby, Emily Goodman Scott, Oliver Camacho, Elisa Lewis, Jennifer Betters Bubin, Rebecca Pianta, Peg Donahue, Miguel Sacedo, Nancy Che, Jennifer Niles, Alexandra Novakovic, Rebecca Michael, and Timothy Franklin. I mean, does that not sound like that sounds like gold
Amazing.
stars, everyone? So,
Yes,
I mean,
it does.
we really
And
just, yeah, go
oh,
ahead.
I was just going to say, we were really intentional about pairing practicing school counselors with leading school counselor educators. We knew, I mean, we really wanted to make sure that everything was grounded in evidence, but we really, really, again, needed to make sure that everything we were saying had a very practical component to it. Yeah.
Yeah, and I would like to say too that not only are contributors, counselor educators, or school counselors in schools, but we also have a large variety of other participants in the book. We
Mhm.
have administrators, we have teachers, we have former social workers, we have former school psychologists, we have former learning support teachers. So we really tried to make this truly a collaborative book with people with different lenses and different areas of expertise so that we could really come together and think about how to do this work well in schools. Because like we said, it's not just school counselors bearing this weight of supporting students' social emotional needs, but it's really truly all of us. So like I said, Melissa and I are not used to doing sessions where it's just us talking and not being able to have collaborative dialogue. So we did want to let you know that we have our email addresses here. So if you ever want to connect with us directly, yes, we do
Mhm.
respond to emails. And so feel free to reach out to us should you ever need to. And then also, Melissa and I, for anyone that's going to the American School Counseling Association conference this summer, Melissa and I will also be there. So if you are planning to be there this summer, we look forward to seeing you very soon in person. And thank you for being with us today.
Oh my gosh, you guys are fantastic. Thank you so much. I learned so much during this discussion, and Had so much I wanted to shout out and clap
No, it's
and
so hard
everything.
not to make it interrupted.
Um, Really fantastic. Kirsten and Melissa. One of the first things I learned was that one must always support one's friends and their ambitions because then you might be able to go visit them in Bali or
Yeah, I mean,
Singapore or
that's
something
so
like that.
fair.
So
Yeah.
always encourage people to do very adventurous things because you may be able to join them.
Right.
But really, these are such helpful frameworks for our partners to be able to adopt and apply when meeting both the needs of their students and their colleagues in helping and really trying to meet them where they are. I personally, I work with schools all over the country as they roll out IntelliSpark, and I can't think of three better words on which to anchor your approach to every day, which is around the importance of being adaptive, balanced, and collaborative. You just have to be responsive. All we do is we're responsive, but I think those are really important mantra. And I also was coming up with my own ABCs. I was like, wow, if you do these things, then you will have alignment, you will have buy-in, and there will be co-ownership.
Absolutely.
So,
Oh,
you know,
Shared ownership.
awesome.
Thank you. And I forgot to mention that. So thank you for bringing that up. Shared
you know,
Perfect. I love
if
that.
everyone's holding hands, the rising tide lifts all boats and it just lightens the load. So
Strength
I
of
really loved these frameworks. I can see so many applications and I'm really excited for people to get their hands on this because I just also loved how adaptive you are in giving those bite-sized pieces because we know how hard it can be to just eat the whole thing at once. Sometimes you just got to
right.
take little bites. So
Yeah.
you practice what you preach clearly, and you're being so collaborative and adaptive and balanced. So well done. And I want to thank our audience for joining us today and for partaking in this. This is really rich, so many great resources that I hope you'll be able to experience and try with your staff and certainly at the benefit of your students. And then I also would just like to share finally, how you can reach us at IntelliSpark if you are interested in learning more about our work. I took to heart the counsel to make sure the student voice and staff voice is at the heart of what you're doing. And it is very easy to create your own surveys for students in IntelliSpark and have that pulse on how individuals or the whole groups are doing
Yeah.
and also to the importance of having all staff on the same page. So I am happy to share that one of the first things that we hear from our partners is how quickly all of their staff are relieved and dialed in because
Sure.
they now know what's going on with students. It's so easy to find that out and to share information. So I hope we will hear from some of you. Please do reach out to us and again, I hope you all can take advantage of the knowledge shared today in this great book, and that you all have a wonderful day wherever you are in the world. So thank you very much and take care.